Okay, I think it should be recording. All right, so this is, for me, it's line 15. I just changed save enemies to write to XML. And again, I'll go line by line. This, as I just talked about, I need to take away and replace that with probably something called path, and then do path as string. So that's a must. And then next, I go line by line, look down. These lines, we've agreed that they're in common between all the XML. So what we're trying to do is just reduce duplicate code and generalize, abstract. Then this, num enemies -1. So I know that I need a list at a certain point. So might as well add in, how about we'll do list of, instead of doing list of enemies, we'll call it list of, any suggestion? Elements. I'll call it entity, because entity, or you can, what's another? You might call it a list of objects or a list of tables. Tables might not be the best, but list of entities is what I think of best description for this. And this will be loaded in as an array. All right, so for num enemies, now this is representing how many enemies you have. What if we use something like, or we might need to pass this in because the array itself doesn't tell us how many enemies, how many items there are. So we might need another variable here. It's usually a good idea to have as few parameters as possible in your function. Otherwise, you might have a function of f of a of b of c of d, and that would be really complicated. So usually you want to reduce this as much as possible, but if you can't, just add another variable in. So I believe none enemies, since it's unrelated to all the other ones, so I'll need to pass this in. So num entity. Let's see, to be consistent, how about num entities, plural, as integer?
That's not being consistent.
Well, because it's num enemies here. Number of enemies, number of students. I think if you say it in English, it's like plural. All right, and then we'll change this to num entities. Is it clear what I'm doing? If you're not shy and not sure, you can raise your hand. So hopefully it's clear what I'm doing here. I'm changing stuff. I'm changing it for the purpose of abstracting it so that I can use it for anything. Phoenix.
So why do you like click on back onto the form?
Click back onto the form.
If I do this, like, I can't go back onto the actual VB itself.
One tab? Oh, could you shrink, minimize your screen?
The way the system did.
Yeah.
And then I can't make type there. Oh, it's like your program to crash.
Oh, okay. Then you might need to restart your computer.
Oh, F4.
Perhaps. That's unfortunate. Okay, but this is recorded. Okay. All right, moving on. Next line. Let's see. Create enemies. Well, this will need to be changed to create entity. Okay, so I'm modifying code. Pay attention. Create entity and list of enemies will be list of entities. Writer. That looks fine. And then moving down. Since we chose to keep last ID, we'll just keep it here for now. And then going down, maybe we'll change this to, we'll change the message, this message box a little bit. We'll probably change it to, how about, let's see, what do we call we called it path. Path plus has been created. Okay? Does it make sense so far? Okay?
Wait, did we change path?
Yes, I'm just changing that message. It was enemies have been created, but path will be our enemies.xml. So path plus that. Sure. Oh, I think I mistyped something. There's a typo here. I just noticed. List of. Would you say list of entity or list of? I think you were plural it, right? When you speak English, like I have a list of students, or is it I have a list of students, right? So let's change it to plural. Okay. So just change the top here. List of entities, plural. Pluralize both of them. Yeah, and change the create enemy to create entity.
Entities.
create entity 1, singular.
Entity. Okay, that's very good.
Okay. So the parts that are changed is the path, this create entity, basically anywhere that says enemy, change that to entity. Okay? So moving on, now we'll need to fix the helper function. So it might be a new terminology. If inside this function or inside this method, I'm calling another method, and doing this is just to separate, break up the problem into components. Then this function over here is usually called a helper function. You can call that a helper function if you need to refer to it. So we'll go down to the helper function and change this. It was called create enemy. Let's call it create entity. And enemy needs to change to entity, as an entity, we don't have an object for it. It's not an enemy, so we can always use the superclass of everything, object. Where is our object? So the idea is any kind of class can be considered as an object. So if you're not sure what data type something is, any kind of class is inheriting from object. So you can always do it as object if you like. Okay. Right, so if you were starting from scratch, what we did last day was copy and paste. I think some of you might be typing out all the code here. You could copy and paste the code for create enemy and save enemy from enemy creation. The other day I copy pasted the code over. All right, next. Let's see. Write start element enemy. All right, this is where we get into the first problem. Now, looking at this code, what we want to do, which will be super cool, listen up. So what this part is doing is going through, well, I mean, you know what it does. It's just going through all the fields inside the enemies, and it's writing them into the XML. But is there a way that we can iterate over them? So that's the problem. So if we think about it, in enemy, this is what enemy looks like currently. And the problem is, do we have a way to iterate through them? So if we're going to create a general, like a function that will allow us to write any class into an XML, then we need a way to iterate through these variables or these fields within a class. But they're not an array. If this was an array, then we can go, this is index 0, index 1, index 2. So what I'm trying to do here is instead of, so I'll just sort of explain it here. You don't have to copy this part. But instead of going something like enemy dot enemy ID, is there a substitute for it that sort of looks like enemy enemy 0? Like if I do enemy ID, substitute that equals 1. If I do enemy 0 equals 1 instead, is there a way that I can treat this as a list of variables? Currently, I don't know. And currently, we haven't learned about it yet. So this will be something new. Okay. All right, so going back to database. Now, how will we change enemy? This is a string, and it's a string representation for the name of our class. Is there a way to grab the name of a class? We can't just put down entity, because entity will be like the variable that holds on to your hero or your enemy. How do we get the name of the class that it belongs to? That I don't know yet. But how about if we, this is a part that I need to search up, since it's something new. So I go back to this, and let's search up how to get class name of variable bbnet. So another part that I'll be briefly going through is when you're searching for information online, there's a lot of garbage information. There's a lot of, well, I mean, information that you might copy and paste and it doesn't work. So in the beginning, you might need to do a lot of copy and pasting stuff and then seeing if that works or not works. A lot of trial and error. That's where you might get discouraged. So you might try 5 of them and it doesn't work. Then maybe that means you need to modify your search criteria, or just go on to the next page and keep searching, or think of different ways that you can search for information. So let's see if we can, this first one seems okay. So instead of going into it, I usually like to open it into a new task. I open about 3 of them at the same time and then look through 3 of them. So determine what type and object reference, class name for current instance. Okay, so I opened these 3 and let's look at them. So this is also one problem that I suffer from, which is called the curse of knowledge. Curse of knowledge means, do you know what it means? Curse of knowledge, have you heard of it? Ben?
It's too smart for your own good.
No. Well, curse of knowledge means if you, well, it's not that, but you might know what it means. You're just phrasing it in a different way. Okay, this means if you learn something, it might seem easy to you because you learned it before, but for a beginner, it's hard to put yourself in their shoes. Have you tried teaching and tutoring your younger brother, sister, or a little kid math, for example, because math?
Yeah, they've got no idea what they're doing.
Yeah, do you feel frustrated sometimes?
Yeah.
It's hard to put yourself in their shoes. So, since I've been doing this, throughout university and searching up information, my eyes would be trained. I'm aware that my eyes might see this a little bit differently from yours. So just be aware that I might be going a little bit too fast, or if there's things that you need clarification, or if you think that, well, how does Mr. Zhang just look at this and identify if this will work or not work, or how do you, decide, how do you filter out garbage from non-garbage? This comes with practice, and I might go through it too fast because of curse of knowledge. So I might think, well, that comes naturally. So look at this and go, let's see, my decision. This seems legit. I think this seems legit. Just so I look at it. So let's try it out. So this seems like, well, look at this. It might not be clear to you what your object means. I think this means something like or entity or hero or enemy. And then if we go get type, we'll save it as a type. So I'll copy this code in and see if I can modify it. So for me, since I'm used to this kind of structure of the code, I have a better idea of how to incorporate this code into our code. You might have trouble with it, but it comes with practice. So now I copied that, I go back. You can type out these lines later. So I'm just going to test if this works. Now the problem is, I can't really test it here because our code is half broken. Right, we have a lot of red underlines. So that's why while I was testing it, you don't need to copy this, but I was testing with a separate project. So just another tip, if you're trying something new and completely new, just create a quick little project so that you can test it. So on the side here, I created a project where I have a customer, and I can delete these. These are actually irrelevant for now. So basically I created a small little class with one field, a string, one field is an integer when I was testing, and then I go back to the form. This is where I could test. So first I create an instance of my customer. Maybe I'll call this customer. And then I'll go, if we paste in this code, and let's see, type as type get object. And notice what happened at the top. I also imported this import system to reflection. So this will be the library that we'll use to try to get metadata. So try to get from an object itself, how do you get the name of the object, how do you get the name of the fields, and how do you iterate through the fields as if it's an array. So we'll be using reflections to do that. All right, so I'm going to change the code here. Your object, well, for me, it will be my customer, .get type, and then type name will be that. And then to test it, let's go message box. So this part you don't need to copy down. Just watch what I'm doing and see if it makes sense. Type name. Okay, so if this code works, what would I expect to be message boxed out?
Customer.
Customer, exactly. Is it clear? So I'm trying to get the name. Can I get the name of that class from just an instance of the variable? I run it. Hopefully this works. Do I get a customer? Wait.
It's gonna say consumer.
Oh, okay. It gives me test field project.customer. Interesting. Okay, now. Okay, so I could use this. Now, is there a way that I could trim it out? Well, it's yes, I could use substring. It seems like this part test field project. Oh, this will depend on my project name. Now, you could see that. Oh, this will be a little bit tricky too, because then the amount that I need to trim by will depend on the length of your project name, or you can change this each time. Or is there a way to grab the project name from the code? That would be a little complicated. Or, what's another way of doing this?
No.
Well, there's a dot here. So see if we can find a way to trim it by the location of the dot. Nicholas?
Your project have a dot in the name?
I don't think you can. Usually just naming conventions just don't have a dot in the name. Yeah, because otherwise it'll be like test.name.vb, and there's two dots here, one for .vb. Usually the dot is for a dot and then the extension of the file type. Alright, so how about we can, here's something that I sort of do at times. Instead of fixing all the issues, I could temporarily use this code, but we'll add a to-do. So inside here, how about, I'm trying to merge this code with my code again. So let's copy this, and this you might need to type out. Okay, type customer, instead of customer, it will be entity. And if we want to be a little bit lazy, here's what you can also do. Let's delete this first line and we'll replace that with entity.getType.full name. Oh, it says full name. That leads me to guess that I might not need full name. Okay, so this is in create entity, and this line of code you might need to copy in, since it's somewhere that I copy pasted from the internet. Yes, maybe we could try that as well. So we could try that on the other part. I'll just have this on the screen so people can copy it for a moment. And if you're ahead, you can also just create another project if you like to test it out, and if you're ahead. Okay, otherwise I'm going to go back here. Oh, sorry, okay. So just this one line of code that you need to copy for now. The other lines of code will change later. Okay, all right, so I'm going to go back here and let's see if we can delete. Let's see, if I go full name, I'm looking at the documentation here. If I hover over, full name says guess the full qualified name. So if I go .name, type .name, does it have name? Guess the name of the current member. So maybe this will work. Let's try this way. So instead of string manipulation. Perfect. So instead of doing a tricky string manipulation, we can just go .name. And sometimes you can see this by looking at how things are named, they're structured. Okay, so just delete the full. Delete the full. So go back to database.vb, delete the full. So just have .name. Then it doesn't have the project name attached to it as well. Okay, so this problem solved. Next problem. How do we iterate through this? So our goal is we want to set up something like a for loop. So I'll just write loosely. You don't have to copy this part. We'll set up some for loop that will iterate through just one instance of this and do something like n4. Okay, obviously it's going to unindent, but this is sort of what I'm trying to aim for. I'll just run one for loop, and these will be replaced by some variables that will iterate, and then it will pick up all the elements or all the fields inside of entity and load it into my XML. So the first thing I'll do is let's comment out all the codes that are duplicate. And we'll just grab one instance of it and go for each. This I'm going to use for each for now. Okay, and this part, we'll first just comment that out, and next we'll look at this part. So, and we might need to just add some comments. I might need to do Google searches to search for Control KC. Yes. Yes. Sorry, yeah. Probably should have reminded you again to comment out, select them all, and then hold down Control, and then go KC while holding down Control. Okay. So the parts we'll need to change is the ID. This part we'll need to change. I'll just replace that with like ... for now. Well, actually, maybe if I change it to ... I might lose track of what I was doing. So I'll just keep it the same. This code I'll need to change. So next, I'll need to Google search for how to iterate through fields in class DBNet.
Yeah, look at his website. They play some music there.
All right. Could you put up a rating between 1 to 5 based on your energy level? So I'm considering giving you a 2-minute break just to, I'll put the code back up so you can copy the parts that you missed, and then we'll give a break, and then we'll start again. 5 means your, a rating from 1 to 5 in terms of your energy bar. So 5 means 5 out of 5, 1 means 1 out of 5 in terms of your energy.
1.
So you can raise your hand and then put up a number. 2, 3. Okay. Yeah, okay, all right. So I'll give you a 2-minute break. So we'll go back to the code. I'll put this back up. And is there a certain part of the code you need to see? Any calls for certain parts of the code? Otherwise you can stretch. Oh, this part we'll need to change. So next we'll change this part of the code. You don't necessarily need to copy that.
What should we have in create entity?
Yes, in create entity. This part will change. Yes, Connor. Yes. How do you use next instead of endpoint? Yes. Yeah, this is just sort of pseudocode. Yeah. Yep. About 1:30. Okay, so timer on the screen for your break. You can browse the internet if you like, or All right, 10 seconds. So finish up what you're doing, and then get back to Visual Studio. Okay. All right, so we just took our break. Next, I'm going to be looking at how to iterate through the properties inside of a class. And then I go down, I look at this. Well, one thing, why I'm not going to use this answer. How do I determine that this answer is not good? What's a quick way? Zero up false. Good. Okay, so that's probably why I'm not going to look at it. It seems quite random to me, so I just skip it. And then this, no, it seems quite random, so I don't like this. Close it. Go back. Is there a way to, nope, that's C sharp. Is there a way to, nope. Well, I looked at these before. So I'm just basically just going to go through, pretend that I don't know the solution, and we'll look through some of them, and I'll explain why some of them. Connor McKinnon is here, warning increments to 1. Class program, does this look okay? So Connor McKinnon is, please don't talk over me. Thanks. Alright, this seems like a different language. It's not even VB. So that's why I'll just skip this. Let's look at this. Iterate over all fields and properties in an object with VB. Title looks promising. And then look into the code. Now, code looks a little bit complicated. I'm just talking out what I'm thinking about. Is this their question? Okay, that's their question. Do they have an answer? Maybe this works. Let's see. System reflection for each pi can read. I'm trying to look for the key parts. Okay, it looks a little bit complicated. So this is where just practice comes in. I look for the key parts, and you know the tricky thing is they'll create special names like FI. You just have to know that FI stands for. Why did they choose FI here?
Fortnite independence.
No, as field info. So probably FI stands for field info. So it seems like this should work. So I'll just grab the parts that are relevant. It's doing for each this as field info. That sounds promising to me. I'm not sure if that sounds promising to you. In something.get fields, and then it's printing the name of it. So we'll try that. So this part I'll test it in my testing code here. So I can safely just delete this since I know that works. And I'll do for each fi as, and let's see, I'll have to grab this part of the code. System.reflection.property.info. Whoops, paste in here. In customer dot, let's see, so T is for my customer. Oh no, T is the type. So first I need to go customer dot get type, and then dot get property. Oh no, sorry, I was looking at this part, field info. So not property info, but actually field info. So what's important for you right now is to get an idea of how I make decisions of what to use, what not to use, and how to merge the code online with the code I have at the moment. So get field. So I'm just comparing these two. My eyes are looking at, well, this says get fields here. And I'm not sure if it's clear because this says get fields, and I look at T, and T is defined up here. T is something that get type, and this is my original object. So that's my customer, and I go get type, and then I go get field. So that's how I trace it. So that's how I know I need to go get type and then get fields. Okay, and inside, let's go fi dot. Well, I need to message box this. Fi dot. How about fi dot name? Okay, and then play. So if this works, what is my purpose of doing this? Looking at customer, my customer looks like this. Okay, my form looks like this. If I'm doing this, what was message box? What was the entire purpose? What should this output? Not customer this time. I'm trying to get the fields. Yes, the name of the fields. So if this works, I would expect to get name and ID. Is that clear? They're the name of the fields. I'm trying to get the data within the class. So now I press start. Let's see what happens. Name, ID. Perfect. That's exactly what I want. Now I'm sure that this works. Now I'll go back and put it into our actual project. So it's important to not add in a bunch of code you're not sure about. Otherwise you have like hundreds of code that might potentially fail. So test this somewhere first to know that it works, and then merge it with your actual code. So now I go back. Now this part will change. So the entire purpose of doing this. Okay, so I need to, let's see, which part should I copy? The for loop here. So the for loop, I'll copy and paste that in here. And then this part you need to copy. For mine, there's this symbol here which means to drop down to the next line. Your screen is a lot wider, so this line of code will be in one straight line. Okay, and FI is that instead of customer, I need to go entity. Whoops, enter. Whoops, sorry, entity. And then instead of that, I need next, as Connor Anthony pointed out earlier. Okay. So this part you need to copy for the for loop. That's the structure of the for loop. Okay, so this part we haven't changed yet. So you just need to copy this code for how to iterate through the fields. Okay, most of this you can just go get T and then tab to fill out the rest. Okay, so I see Nicholas is done, Mason's done, and Benny, Trent, you guys are done. Okay, so we'll move on. Next, this purpose is to change just simply this ID. So what do we replace this by? So we'll compare this code. In this code, it looks like this. In here, what should we replace it by? Phi.name. Okay. And let's see, write string. Now, what is this part? Enemy.id. So this part was just the name of that field. Next, we'll have to grab the value of that field. And this is different. Is it clear? This is just getting the name, that's getting the value. So now we have to look at search online to see how to get value of, what do I call it? A value of field in class VBNet. Okay, so if I search that, so again, I might be affected by the curse of knowledge. When I look at this, I go, well, field info.get value. That looks legit to me. And instead of clicking into this link, this gives me an idea of what function to use. So I know that I probably just need to use a get value. So notice that I didn't click into any of these. When I was searching, I just typed that in, I look at this, this gives me a hint. So this hints that I can just simply go something like fi.getValue. And it has get value here. Okay, and the next part, I can either look at code or I'll just look at the documentation within. And it says get value, it accepts one parameter, object. An object, does it say what object is? By the given object. So the given object should be, is it clear? So this part, I might be cursed by the curse of knowledge. Can you guess what object is? What should I put into the parameter here? So get value something, and it's accepting an object. What could that object be? I need to input something. So sort of the hint is, look at this code, see if you see somewhere that has something defined as object. Entity.
Entity.
So we need here entity. So part of it is looking at patterns. And you identify patterns with practice. Okay, so this should work. And to be sure, we can also, I'm also just going to briefly, I'm pretty sure that works, but all right, to save time, I don't need to test it here. I'll just let you know that I tested this before. I created some value for a customer, tested it, it does work. So it's best to test it before actually using it. But here I'm just going to use it. Okay, I think that's all I need to do. Now, for enemy. Now the one, well, if we do that, we will run into a problem. So how about, what's the problem here? I think that should be fine. So I think, let's see, I see one red underline in line 125 for me. Save enemies. Okay. So this part I need to modify. Let's see, this is for create, oh, so this is in enemy creation.vb. I see one red underline, save enemies. And this is because we changed how enemies is structured. We have more parameters here. Save enemies, we need to go back. Save enemies over here, we'll change it to, oh, we changed the entire thing to write to XML instead. It's no longer called save enemies, but write to XML. And for my reference, I'll just copy this entire part. I don't need to copy it since I'll just be typing it in to create enemy creation. I need to replace this with write to XML. And instead of having these, so you have the as string, as integer when you're declaring it. But when you're using it, we just need to have the inputs. I'm just going to delete all the as. And path, what should path be replaced by? If this all made sense. If it doesn't, then that's fine. It's the first time doing it. You can watch the video again. But if you understood what this was, write to XML. We spent the last last period creating write to XML. What is path?
On the XML file.
Yes, the path to the XML file. And the XML file was previously named, I'm not sure you can remember, it was enemies, just enemies.xml. Okay? The next, list of entities. It's not list of entities. What is our list called? List of enemies. And then num entities, num enemies. So this might be confusing. There's certain parts that we're using entities, certain parts we're using enemies. This is when we're actually going to pass in enemy information. So that's why these are all list of enemy, whereas the function itself that we're creating, we're using entity as a general variable. Okay, I have a red underline over here. I'm not sure why that is the case. Okay, I think that's num entities, now num enemies, because we're passing in actual data. Okay. And I think everything is fixed, so run the code and see what happens. Okay, now I can load it. So if this all works, then nothing should be changed. It's just that so nothing should be changed. I should expect it to work exactly like how it was before. I'm just going to do this, attack, defense, hit points, save. Enemies.xml have been created. Please check the debug, and I'll go over. I had this prep beforehand. Otherwise, you can navigate towards your debug folder and open up enemies and see what's inside. Oh no, I see nothing. There's a problem. I see last ID. I don't have anything for enemy. It's empty. Now the problem is, well, there is a problem. I know what it is. This might be really tricky to identify. Do you have a guess to what went wrong here? Phoenix. Phoenix.
Because that we commented it at number.
We commented out, we commented out, but we replaced it with a for loop that should iterate through all of the fields. So by the logic, it should work. So here's one thing. Since the problem is definitely inside the writer, how about if I go message box and fi.name? Let's see if it can actually output the name. Or is there any problems here? So that's just what comes to me naturally. I'll just message box this out, see if it works. So again, let's see. This part, value cannot be null. List of enemies. The second time running it, now there's a problem with load. And this I'll need to change. This is fine. It's all under control. Don't worry. List of enemies, because so the problem is beforehand we had information inside of enemies. Now we deleted them. We overwrote them by written by a blank enemies with nothing inside. So now we have nothing loaded in enemies. What we could do is go back here. Let's just go. Can we go back? No, we can't go back since we lost the data already. You can download from Moodle, but we're going to do something different. So here's the problem. This I'll just go over with you. The one problem is, I think with, let's see. So this is saying list of enemies, and I don't have anything inside. Num enemies -1. Let's see if we can just not use this code temporarily. Okay. So I'm in enemy creation. I'll temporarily just comment out this update CBO view enemies. I think one problem is our load XML has not been implemented. We've implemented writer, so I'm just going to comment out the parts that does the load. And I'm just going to test one thing at a time. Now, ideally, load shouldn't be broken because it should use the same code as I used before. I'm just going to comment it out to eliminate possible threats. So I'm just going to comment out load enemies here, and let's see if there's other load enemies. Nope, it seems like, oh, there's another load enemy down here, so I'll comment this out as well. And is there another load enemy? Nope, that's all. Right, so I searched for all the load enemies. There's one in battle.vb. In line 28 of battle.vb, there's a load enemies. So comment out the load, because I'm suspecting that load could be messing us up, because we're halfway done with the generalization.
Wait, sorry. So in battle.
VB, there's a load enemies in line 28. Form enemy creation.load enemies. So copy this out, comment that out. This is in search for enemy. I'm not sure if you have it.
Yeah, I should have.
Okay, that's fine. And then in enemy creation, comment out load enemy. You can also search for load enemy and comment it out. Okay, next. I'm trying to think of what else could go wrong here. Now we'll run it again, test it. Okay, at least this time it gives us a form, and then we'll change this, put this in, 23, 23, 23, save. Enemies have been created. Please check the bin debug folder. Now, what I did before, I'm not sure if you caught that, in database, I put down this message box fi.name. However, nothing got output. I would expect this to output like enemy name, enemy ID, all of that. But since it doesn't, what could be a potential error? So this is giving me a clue as to what the problem is by doing message boxes. Nicholas.
fi.name has no value at all.
fi.name has no value. If it has no value, the message box, would it still show up? If this is blank, would you still get a message box showing up?
They bug out. No.
Well, you could test it this way. For example, if you go back, if you try anything, and if I go say message box with blank, I'm not sure if it'll accept this, but let's try it. Message block with blank. Oh no, so it doesn't like that. But what about message block with nothing inside, like just an empty? Well, how about just null? Does it have null? No, it must be nothing then. Oh, okay, so in VB it's called nothing. Message box nothing. So if I put nothing inside a message box, if there really was no data, so nothing is kind of the syntax for a null statement, nothing inside, then it will give me it should give me a blank message box. But it's not even doing that. It's not. I was expecting a bunch of these message box with all the names of the field, but it's not even now it's doing that twice. So if the message box works, then it should do that. But since I have no message box displayed to the screen at all, what might the problem be? Is it even going into this line? Maybe this line is it getting run? If it gets run, then it should display a message box regardless of what is inside, as long as it's not blank. If it's not run, then what could be the issue?
So it has to have an FI to run.
Well, even if this code is given as blank, it will still display a message box onto the screen.
No, at the moving forward,
right?
the FI would have to have a value bigger than 0 for it to run, right?
Yes, okay, so FI needs to have something for it to run. Well, FI is an element. So this side here might be a little bit complicated. This entire part is basically just saying what type it is. It's a type called field info, sort of a metadata type. And then this is getting it from the list of all the fields of my object. My object is entity. So grabbing all the fields. So entity I tapped in as enemy, right? So this should give me a list of all the fields, and it will iterate through them. When does the for loop not run? So that's the question. If you have a list,
If there's no FI.
If there's no
FI.
If there's no FI, what is FI in general for a list? If I have a list,
Field
There's nothing in the list.
there's nothing in the list.
Yeah.
Yes. Is it clear? So if this doesn't run, it's signaling, it's hinting to me that there's nothing in the list at all. So that could be the problem. So here's another way to test it. How would I verify that? I would use message box, and this is my list. My list is entity.getType.getFields. I'm wondering if I can just paste this in. Now if I paste stuff into here, this should at least run because it's outside of that for loop. Our suspicion is there's nothing inside the list, so it doesn't run at all. So if I try that, but then I have to do this again, which is slightly annoying. And save. Oh, now it doesn't like it because it's giving me obviously I'm expecting the message box is expecting a string, so I can't do that. But what I could do is, since I have a list here, I can go dot. I'm thinking of dot length to check how many elements are inside there. Does that make sense? So I'm just going dot length. If my theory, so when you're debugging, you would normally have a theory. So you have a hypothesis thinking what might be wrong, and then you want to verify your theory immediately. So I'll output the length, and if my theory is right, then the length should be 0. So even if I code, I still run into a lot of problems, and I'm sure that when you code, you run into problems as well. And I'm just going through the methods how I resolve these problems. Okay, so it gives me 0. So therefore, my theory is verified. I know that there's nothing inside the list. So that's a problem. And why is that? So inside of this test, so in the test, it worked perfectly fine. I can iterate through them. But however, in my actual code, I can't even iterate through them. What is the difference? So I look into this code, it seems fine. Then I could also look into customer. This is my customer. Now compare with hero, not here. Is that my hero? Yes, my enemy. So I go into enemy. My enemy is like this. My customer is like that. What is the key difference? friend public. So what happens is if I go hover over get fields, we can read it. Returns all the public fields of a current type. So another hint is a tip is when you're using a function, just read the documentation at least once. So now we'll have to, it might not be the best way to solve it, but this will work at the moment. We'll have to change all of these to public for us to iterate over them. Yes, Connor. Oh, enemy.vb, it's on the side. Oh, you might have it under hero.vb if you downloaded the original one. So it could be under hero.vb. If you go down, there's a public class enemy. Okay, so we're just going to change all of these friends into public. All right, so that I think you can do it, and I'll run the code, and hopefully this time it'll work. Yeah, go back here. Okay, it does work now. So this was the data I inputted, and now it's showing up inside my XML. Okay. All right, so that should be everything for converting the write to a general write to XML, and then we can use this code to write any XML file to any class to an XML file. Okay, so just leave it at that. We've done a lot of coding, and I talked about a lot of ways to get around logic issues. So I'll give you a bit of time to see if you can get it to work, and see if you can use this code, the code for writing, and apply it to Hero as well. So for the remaining part of class, I'll stop the video actually, otherwise it'll be too large.